India's relationship with its South Asian neighbors is one of the most complex geopolitical puzzles in the world today. As the region's dominant power by virtually every measure, India finds itself in a position that no country in South Asia can ignore. Yet, this dominance creates a fundamental tension that shapes every diplomatic interaction, every trade negotiation, and every security decision across the subcontinent. With over 1.4 billion people and an economy larger than all other South Asian nations combined, India's sheer size creates an asymmetry that defines regional dynamics. When India makes a policy decision, neighboring countries feel the ripple effects, whether they want to or not. This reality has led to dramatically different perceptions of India's role, with some nations viewing New Delhi as an overbearing hegemon, while others see it as an indispensable partner for prosperity and stability. To understand these contrasting views, we need to examine the historical foundations that continue to influence regional relationships today. The partition of British India in 1947 created new borders and deep psychological wounds that persist decades later. The violent displacement of millions during partition, followed by multiple wars between India and Pakistan, established a pattern of mistrust that extends beyond bilateral relations to influence how other South Asian nations view India's intentions. The 1971 Bangladesh Liberation War exemplifies this complexity. India's military intervention helped create Bangladesh, and it also demonstrated India's willingness to use force to reshape regional borders. While Bangladeshis largely welcomed Indian support for their independence, other neighbors took note of India's capacity and willingness to intervene decisively in regional conflicts. Pakistan represents the most prominent example of viewing India as an overbearing regional hegemon. The relationship between these nuclear-armed neighbors remains defined by competition and mistrust. Pakistan's leadership often frames India's regional engagement as an attempt to encircle and isolate Pakistan. When India strengthens ties with Afghanistan, develops Chabahar port in Iran, or deepens defense cooperation with other neighbors, Pakistani policymakers interpret these moves through the lens of strategic competition. The Kashmir dispute amplifies these tensions, with both countries claiming the entire territory while controlling different portions. Pakistan views India's presence in Kashmir as illegitimate occupation, while India sees Pakistani support for militant groups in Kashmir as state-sponsored terrorism. This fundamental disagreement colors every aspect of their relationship and influences how other regional players navigate between the two powers. Sri Lanka's experience with India illustrates how even smaller neighbors can find themselves caught in uncomfortable positions. During Sri Lanka's civil war, India initially supported Tamil separatist groups, then later intervened militarily through the Indian Peacekeeping Force from 1987 to 1990. Many Sri Lankans viewed this intervention as heavy-handed, creating lasting resentment about Indian interference in domestic affairs. More recently, Sri Lanka's economic crisis and subsequent bailout negotiations have highlighted concerns about Indian influence. When Sri Lanka leased Hambantota port to China due to debt pressures, India worried about Chinese military presence in its backyard. India's response, including increased economic assistance and infrastructure investments, demonstrates how regional powers use economic tools to maintain influence, and it also raises questions about Sri Lankan sovereignty in choosing its partners. Nepal's relationship with India demonstrates how geography and economics create dependencies that smaller nations sometimes resent. As a landlocked country, Nepal relies heavily on Indian ports for international trade, giving India significant economic power. The 2015 border blockade, which Nepalis widely blamed on India despite official denials, severely damaged bilateral relations and pushed Nepal closer to China. The blockade occurred during Nepal's constitutional crisis, and many Nepalis interpreted India's actions as an attempt to dictate their internal political arrangements. This episode reinforced perceptions of India as a domineering neighbor willing to use economic pressure to influence domestic politics. The fact that Nepal subsequently signed multiple agreements with China, including joining the Belt and Road Initiative, demonstrates how perceived Indian heavy-handedness can drive neighbors toward alternative partnerships. However, These examples of tension tell only part of the story. Bangladesh represents perhaps the most successful example of India-South Asia cooperation in recent decades. Despite initial post-independence challenges, the relationship has transformed dramatically, particularly since Sheikh Hasina's government took office in 2009. Trade between India and Bangladesh has grown exponentially, with India becoming Bangladesh's second-largest trading partner. Indian investments in Bangladeshi infrastructure, including power generation and transportation projects, have contributed significantly to Bangladesh's impressive economic growth. The two countries have also cooperated effectively on counterterrorism, with Bangladesh taking strong action against anti-India militant groups operating from its territory. This cooperation extends to practical matters that improve lives on both sides of the border. The recent inauguration of cross-border rail services and the operationalization of the Chittagong and Mongla ports for Indian cargo demonstrate how India-Bangladesh partnership creates mutual benefits. When floods or cyclones strike the region, both countries coordinate relief efforts, showing how geographic proximity can enable positive cooperation rather than creating vulnerabilities. Bhutan represents another model of successful India-South Asia partnership, though the relationship operates on very different terms than India's ties with larger neighbors. India's role in Bhutan's development has been extensive, funding major infrastructure projects and providing significant budgetary support. The hydroelectric cooperation between the two countries generates revenue for Bhutan while providing clean energy for India. Critics might argue that Bhutan's dependence on India limits its sovereignty, yet the relationship appears to work for both parties. Bhutan has maintained its unique cultural identity and political system while benefiting from Indian economic support. The 2017 Doklam standoff, where Indian troops supported Bhutan's territorial claims against Chinese road construction, demonstrated India's commitment to defending smaller partners against external pressure. The Maldives illustrates how domestic politics can dramatically shift perceptions of India's role. Under President Mohammad Nasheed, the Maldives maintained close ties with India and relied on Indian security assistance. However, during Abdullah Yamin's presidency from 2013 to 2018, the relationship deteriorated significantly as the Maldives moved closer to China and adopted increasingly authoritarian policies. The 2018 election that brought Ibrahim Mohamed Solih to power marked another shift, with the new government actively seeking to repair ties with India while balancing relationships with other partners. This political volatility demonstrates how changes in domestic leadership can rapidly alter regional dynamics, and it also shows India's ability to rebuild relationships when political conditions change. India's economic influence across South Asia continues to grow through trade, investment, and development assistance. The South Asian Free Trade Area, despite its limitations, has increased regional economic integration. Indian companies have become major investors across the region, from telecommunications in Bangladesh to hydroelectric projects in Nepal and Bhutan. However, this economic influence creates its own tensions. Smaller economies worry about being overwhelmed by Indian goods and services, leading to persistent trade imbalances. When India temporarily banned onion exports in 2019, it created shortages and price spikes across the region, highlighting how dependent neighbors have become on Indian agricultural products. The development of regional connectivity projects presents both opportunities and challenges. India's support for road, rail, and port infrastructure can boost economic growth across South Asia. Yet these same projects also increase Indian influence and create new dependencies. The challenge for India is demonstrating that connectivity serves mutual interests rather than serving only Indian strategic goals. Security concerns add another layer of complexity to regional relationships. India's worry about Chinese influence in South Asia has intensified in recent years, as Beijing has increased investments and military cooperation with several regional countries. The presence of Chinese submarines in Sri Lankan ports, Pakistan's participation in the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, and Nepal's growing ties with China all concern Indian security planners. From India's perspective, These developments represent potential security threats that require active responses. Indian policymakers worry about being surrounded by countries that might provide facilities for hostile powers. This leads to Indian actions that neighbors sometimes interpret as attempts to limit their sovereign choices about international partnerships. The terrorism threat adds urgency to these security concerns. Cross-border terrorism, particularly from Pakistan-based groups, has killed hundreds of Indians and created constant tension. India's military responses, including surgical strikes and airstrikes against terrorist camps, demonstrate its willingness to use force when it perceives direct threats to its security. However, these same actions reinforce perceptions among some neighbors that India is quick to resort to military solutions. The challenge for Indian policymakers is addressing legitimate security concerns while avoiding actions that push neighbors toward adversarial relationships or alternative security partnerships. Water sharing represents one of the most sensitive aspects of India's regional relationships. As an upper riparian country for most South Asian rivers, India's dam construction and water management decisions directly affect downstream neighbors. Bangladesh has concerns about reduced water flow in the Ganges and other rivers, while Pakistan disputes Indian hydroelectric projects in Kashmir. These water disputes have the potential to become more serious as climate change affects regional precipitation patterns and growing populations increase demand for water resources. Successful management of shared water resources could become a foundation for broader regional cooperation. Yet failure to address these issues fairly could create new sources of conflict. The COVID-19 pandemic provided an interesting test case for India's regional leadership. Initially, India's vaccine diplomacy, providing vaccines to neighbors before ensuring complete domestic coverage, was widely praised as an example of responsible regional leadership. However, when India subsequently restricted vaccine exports due to its own surge in cases, some neighbors felt abandoned. This episode illustrates the fundamental challenge India faces as a regional power. Neighbors expect India to provide leadership and support during crises, and they also expect India to prioritize regional needs over its own domestic concerns. Managing these expectations while maintaining domestic political support requires careful balancing that doesn't always satisfy all parties. The reality is that India's role in South Asia cannot be reduced to simple categories of hegemon or partner. The relationship dynamics are too complex and varied across different countries and issue areas. India's size and capabilities make it impossible for the country to avoid being a dominant regional presence. Yet how that dominance is exercised makes all the difference in how neighbors respond. The most successful Indian regional policies have been those that create genuine mutual benefits rather than simply serving Indian interests. The India-Bangladesh partnership works because both countries gain economically and strategically from cooperation. The India-Bhutan relationship succeeds because it respects Bhutanese autonomy while providing tangible development benefits. Conversely, Indian policies that are perceived as coercive or dismissive of smaller neighbors' concerns tend to backfire by pushing those countries toward alternative partnerships. The 2015 Nepal blockade and the heavy-handed intervention in Sri Lanka during the 1980s demonstrate how the misuse of Indian influence can create lasting resentment and strategic complications. Looking forward, India's challenge will be developing a regional approach that acknowledges the legitimate concerns of smaller neighbors while protecting Indian security interests. This requires moving beyond a purely bilateral approach to embrace genuine multilateral institutions that give smaller countries a voice in regional decision-making. The success of regional organizations like the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation has been limited, partly because India-Pakistan tensions dominate the agenda and partly because India has sometimes preferred bilateral relationships that maximize its influence. However, as China's influence in the region grows, India may find that multilateral approaches that bind neighbors into institutional frameworks serve Indian interests better than purely bilateral relationships. Economic integration offers the most promising path forward for transforming regional relationships. When countries benefit economically from cooperation with India, they have incentives to maintain positive relationships even when political disagreements arise. The challenge is ensuring that economic integration creates jobs and opportunities in smaller countries, rather than simply expanding markets for Indian businesses. The infrastructure connectivity that India is promoting through initiatives like the South Asia Satellite and various road and rail projects could create the foundation for deeper economic integration. However, these projects need to be designed and implemented in ways that address neighbors' concerns about sovereignty and ensure that benefits are genuinely shared. Climate change and environmental challenges also provide opportunities for regional cooperation that could help transform political relationships. South Asia faces common challenges from rising sea levels, changing precipitation patterns, and extreme weather events. Coordinated responses to these challenges could build habits of cooperation that extend to other areas. The question of whether India is viewed as South Asia's big brother ultimately depends on which neighbors you ask and which aspects of the relationship you examine. The diversity of relationships across the region reflects the complex interplay of history, geography, economics, and domestic politics that shapes how different countries experience Indian power. What seems clear is that India's regional relationships will continue to evolve as the broader strategic environment changes. China's growing presence in South Asia, changing global economic patterns, and domestic political developments in regional countries will all influence how neighbors view cooperation with India versus alternative partnerships. For India, the challenge is learning to exercise regional leadership in ways that smaller neighbors find acceptable and beneficial rather than threatening. This requires a level of strategic restraint and sensitivity to neighbors' concerns that major powers don't always demonstrate naturally. However, the examples of successful partnerships with countries like Bangladesh and Bhutan show that such an approach is possible and can serve Indian interests effectively. The future of South Asia may well depend on whether regional countries can find ways to cooperate that acknowledge India's predominant position while ensuring that smaller nations retain meaningful autonomy and benefit genuinely from regional integration. The alternative of continued fragmentation and competition serves no one's long-term interests and leaves the entire region vulnerable to external manipulation and internal conflict.